They say that 80% of communication is nonverbal, or perhaps even more than that.
So much of business success is wrapped up in our self-esteem and how that then plays out in our communication. If this game of business was purely based on intellectual capacity, then architects should be very rich on the whole.
Hello, Architect Nation, and welcome back. This is the right place if you run a small architectural practice. And on today's episode of the Business of Architecture podcast, you'll discover the silent killer of your initial consultations and why you may unknowingly be repelling clients without even opening your mouth. What a Buddhist monastery, a stained sweater, and a crying architect can teach you about unlocking leadership magnetism and the unexpected trick Warren Buffett used to become a better communicator, and why it might be the most profitable investment that you ever make. And now a word from today's sponsors.
Today's episode is sponsored by Vectorworks. Why settle for switching between multiple design programs to complete a single project? With Vectorworks Architect, you don't have to. Simplify your workflow with a hybrid 2D and 3D modeling environment made to support your work, from the pre-design phase all the way through construction documentation in a single platform. Learn more about the tool that can help you accomplish everything you need with the free 7-day trial of Vectorworks Architect. Get started here at vectorworks.net/business of architecture. A while ago, we began to hear reports of a company that was helping some of our clients build remote teams. We looked into it more closely and discovered the company World Teams that was helping small architectural practitioners build remote teams that were both capable and qualified. We were intrigued by another business that are addressing one of the critical pain points for small architectural practices, which is the ability to grow and shrink a team effectively, to be able to handle higher workflow without having to staff up significantly, and also being very sensitive about labor cost. World Teams is built to address these issues. World Teams is a small but mighty company that helps architectural practices build high-performing remote teams quickly and efficiently, saving you the headache of sorting resumes and interviewing underqualified candidates. World Teams operates in your time zone and prioritizes near-native English speakers, ensuring clear and efficient communication with your remote team members. They have flexible contracts so you can adjust your team size as your needs evolve. Additionally, you're connected directly with your skilled professionals, which fosters trust and collaboration, and World Teams helps you reduce your operating cost without compromising the quality that's so important to a practice. To download a free guide for building a remote team for a small architectural practice, go to businessafarchitecture.com/World Teams. That's one word, businessafarchitecture.com/World Teams. As a reminder, sponsorship is not an endorsement, and you must do your own due diligence before entering into any business relationship. Go to businessafarchitecture.com/World Teams.
Hello and welcome back, Architect Nation. I'm Enoch Sears, and today joining me is my co-host, Business of Architecture Principal, Ryan Willard. Ryan, how are you tonight?
I'm very well, thank you. Always a pleasure.
So today we're going to talk about something that we don't often see, but oftentimes we can feel. Ryan was recounting that he was recently meeting in person with some Business of Architecture illustrious clients, and he could feel that something was a little off. He noticed that one of these men, his body language was tense. His smile seemed a little forced. He seemed a little fidgety. And Ryan, after having done so much meditation recently, was feeling particularly grounded and noticed this subtle shift in this person's energy, which helped Ryan realize and made us think, which is what we're going to talk about today, how oftentimes it's the invisible parts of us, things like stress, things like worries, or simply uncomfortableness in our own skin, the weight that we carry that can either magnetize people towards us, team members, clients, potential partners, or push them away without us even knowing it. So one of the important parts about leadership and about self-development as you grow your business is not just focusing on the outside stuff. Real leadership means doing oftentimes the deep, difficult inside work, but also one of the valuable parts of having some sort of outward mentor or coach to help reflect these parts back to us. And I'll tell one story to kick this off. This happened similarly, Ryan, several years ago. where it must have been about 10 years ago. We're holding a mastermind event, a workshop in San Francisco. And one of the clients that I'd been working with for a while showed up. And this is the first time I'd ever seen this gentleman in person. And when he was in person, instantly I noticed that he kind of had kind of an odd smell. He just smelled a little odd. Well, I think we can laugh. We should laugh. I can relate to it. We all know that's one of our fears is like, how do I smell? I hope I smell okay. And not only that, but he was wearing the sweater that had like a small stain on it, and it also had a small hole in it. And this gentleman had been struggling to land some deals. And as we were working with him remotely over Zoom, we're just scratching our head. Well, we can't exactly see why you're not being able to close these deals, but it all revealed itself when we met with him in person. Now, Ryan, before we jump into this conversation, where are you broadcasting from today in this amazing studio? He's got this, for those of you listening, Ryan looks like he's in some sort of cathedral with this beautiful hewn wall behind him with this nice
Isn't it
uplight.
nice? I was very impressed. It's an Airbnb
It's gorgeous.
in Northumberland, and I chose it because I saw the picture on the Airbnb, and I thought that would make a fantastic background for the podcasts. And it's a little cottage in a place called Pontyland, right up on the Northumberland and Scotland, the England-Scotland border. We're not too far away from there. And I've been visiting the monastery that I'm a trustee of over this week. And the house is actually designed and owned by an architect.
Can't go wrong there.
And I think you're seeing this more and more on Airbnbs, that architect-designed sublets or houses or whatever actually go for a premium. And it's very nice, and all the details are wonderful. There's lovely use of mirror everywhere that kind of keeps the space expansive. It's raw exposed ironwork, the steel work up here, which you can't see. And then this wall, I'm presuming, is an original kind of really old wall from the original cottage that was there. And then they've just
incredible.
And then they've just got this lovely uplighting along the floor, and there's a nice detail here because the lighting's been concealed by just some slate. So there's just got slate tiles that are just stacked up on top of each other. It's very simple and it's nice. It's very nice.
Must have been an architect.
There's got to be an architect. Yeah.
Well, there's a little business opportunity for someone who wants to consult on Airbnbs.
Yeah.
And so what are you doing up there, Ryan? Tell us.
Was visiting a small Buddhist monastery that I've been going to for many years. And I'm a trustee of the charity that operates the monastery. So we help the Sangha, the monks, handle their money and make decisions and make sure that all the affairs are being dealt with properly. And it's very nice. And once a year, all the trustees get together for an in-person meeting. And when I come up here, I like to stay in and around the monastery for a week or so and get some meditation in and reconnect with my Buddhist practice. So over the weekend, I spent a day in what's called a little kuti. So a kuti is like a monk's shelter where they might do a lot of meditation practice, and normally these kutis are placed somewhere out in nature or in a forest. So that was how I spent the weekend, and then I rented this cottage out, which is just a few miles down the road, because it's not appropriate for me to be doing podcasts late into the night in the monastery.
Well, the question I really want to know is, are they doing everything appropriately, Ryan?
Of course. You know what? The level of integrity that the monks have with their business dealings is wonderful. It really is it's like impeccable is the word that I would use. And the abbot is very keen to, maintain the spirit of the Buddha's teachings and honesty and the right spirit. And I find it very inspiring, and little things that might seem, what's the word, very pernickety. We often deal with them in order to keep an impeccable level of integrity with how the charity is operated. I'll give you an example. A few years ago, there was a meeting that we'd had as the annual general meeting, and then there's a directors meeting, and they're two kind of separate meetings. And when the AGM is formally closed, there's a process to formally reopen the meeting. In practical terms, you have the AGM, it's all the same people around the table, and then it moves into the directors meeting, which is a separate meeting. And something had been missed off the agenda of the AGM. And we kind of formally closed the AGM, and the directors meeting began. And the secretary was like, oh, we forgot to do this one little piece on the AGM. And we were like, well, let's just cover that bit and then we can sign it off. And then the abbot was like, well, hold on a minute, hasn't we closed the AGM? And we were like, well, yes, formally. And then it was like, okay, so what's the formal process for reopening an AGM? And then the secretary was like, well, according to our constitution, you have to give 3 months notice. And everyone was like, whereas a normal life, you would have just, done it and signed off on it. But it's that kind of level of integrity. It might seem over the top, perhaps in some cases, but it's I do find it very important, and it kind of shines a light onto, business practices and the sorts of things that are very easy and the everyday running of a business that you overlook, or how you might fill out things on your tax forms, or all those little pieces that people can be sloppy with. And just bringing a high level of integrity to it, I think it's really lovely.
Well, as you started out talking about feeling what it looks like when someone feels uncomfortable in their skin, and I'm going to be talking about my own experience with this. And then we can relate that back to also impeccability of appearance, which kind of goes back to the Buddhist ideal of how they run their business, talking about the impeccability with which they handle their business and financial operations. So let's look at that as a bit of an anecdote or a bit of an analogy for ourselves, that as business leaders, as we're looking to be leaders in our business, as we're looking to guide our team members, as we're looking to not only challenge and guide our clients, that this level of high integrity and impeccability, attention to details, is highly important. And one of these things is the energy in which we approach meetings and conversations. And from my side, being a natural introvert, I've always felt, for whatever reason, I felt very uncomfortable in my body. Meaning I've always felt a little dis-ease socially around other people. Socially awkward, you might say, or a little bit of social anxiety. Recently, we were on a family camp out with my siblings, and my brother shared something really interesting. He said, as I was driving down to join you guys for the camp out, he said, I was having some anxiety about getting together in person. We've been having a lot of good time talking over Zoom and connecting as a family in that way. But as he was coming together with the family, he said, I was experiencing some anxiety. And so we asked him, we said, well, why do you think that is? Why were you experiencing that anxiety? And he said, I think it's because there's a part of me that feels like I have something to prove. And that just resonated with me really powerfully. I could see that same pattern in me, always feeling a little bit like the one kid out, always being the kid that maybe didn't have the funny jokes to say, always feeling like I had something to prove in a social situation. And so as a result, what ended up happening is my nervous system would be activated when I was around groups of people, and with a heightened nervous system, meaning my body's being put into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, it's more difficult to me to be able to be my fully expressed self because I'm worried, what are people going to think about me? Am I going to say the right thing? Am I accepted here? All these ideas of needing to prove myself. So all these things, if we're not aware of them, other people can sense and other people can pick up on. Now, you had recently, we're talking with some of our illustrious clients, and you, as well as you have in the past. And this was,
Yeah, and again, I can speak to my own experiences of being uncomfortable, and
not you, Ryan.
yeah, can you believe?
I know it's hard. It's very, very hard to believe.
I,
So this is the guy who used to get friends together to throw parties and huge band concerts. But go on, Ryan, do tell.
yeah, so I've always been more of an extroverted personality, and certainly enjoyed talking in front of people and being in groups, and I've always known that I know how to make people feel a little bit warm when you're talking with them, and certainly in a group, and take enjoyment if there's a group and everyone's feeling a little bit awkward. I know that I can be the bit of a social lubricant and get people talking and feeling at ease, all that kind of stuff. But in my professional life as an architect, um, I was and certainly when I was working in like some of these big offices, I very much didn't feel like I was supposed to, like I could speak or contribute in meetings. And it was probably one of the reasons why I really did not like working in a firm, because I just felt like I was muted. And a lot of that was my own insecurities of not wanting to say something stupid or say an idea and get it wrong, or whatever. So I'd kind of like I'd hold my opinions to myself, much to my own frustration. I always remember there was one time we were working on some conference center, and it was in the Alps or something like that. And we were kind of doing this crit, and in my head I was like, oh, it would be a great idea if we had the stage like in front of the window and you could see the Alps behind or something like that. And in my head I was like, oh, that's a really stupid idea. Don't voice that to everybody, because you're going to get torn apart, and you're going to they're going to mock your ideas, and it's going to upset all the people with the fire strategy and all this kind of stuff. And I just sat on the idea. And then a few minutes later, of course, that idea was looking for somebody, and I rejected it, and it went over to somebody else, and somebody else just said, blah, 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 why don't we do this? And everyone was like, oh, what a great idea. And I was like, ah. But I blamed, at the time, in my sort of ignorance, I went into a default defensive way of thinking about it, and was like, oh, well, they never listened to me anyway. So I was very much kind of creating, a me versus them type of scenario that had me feel very uncomfortable and talking. And then also talking in front of a large group, like if it was mine, then that was a little bit different. But those sorts of conversations where everyone was expressing ideas and stuff, certainly in my early days as an architect, I didn't feel very comfortable doing that sort of thing. I also remember one time when I was doing a lot of leadership training, and part of the leadership training was we had to get up in front of an audience of about 200 people, and we had to give a little introduction about ourselves. And I got up on the stage, and it was one of these kind of very intensive weekends that we've been doing, and gave my introduction to the whole group. And I thought I was great. And the trainer was like, okay, so I want everyone in the audience to put their hands up of who trusts Ryan and who believes he's being authentic. And I was expected to see this glorious sea of hands, and literally nobody put their hand up.
So like doing the wave at a professional game.
Yeah, I thought people were going to stand up and just and
Cheer.
celebrate and cheer, and nobody put their hand up. And then the trainer was like, "Okay, Ryan, what's going on? Like you're coming up here, and like nobody believes you. Nobody's like," and I just suddenly felt exposed. And at that point, and I didn't know where it came from, I just suddenly started crying in front of like 200 people. And I was like, oh my God, no, this is like the worst thing that can be happening. Now I'm being really vulnerable in front of this audience. And how has this suddenly gone from, I thought I was doing great, to now I feel like I'm a child and I'm a grown man crying in front of this audience. And it was really great because it was such a release as well. And it got me to be vulnerable. And I recognized how I was hiding behind a very kind of professional or polished way of delivering information. And it was almost like I was saying the right words, but it was like I was kind of delivering it in a polished way, but I was just soulless, or I was like, the people weren't connecting with me. And the tears and the kind of heightened experience of it just brought me back to being vulnerable and opened me up. And the trainer was like, okay, I want you to do this again. And you're allowed to be yourself. You're allowed to be you. And you don't have to be any kind of way. And you can speak in your South London accent and have just all the things that you are. You're allowed to do it. And you're allowed to have fun with it. And I kind of pulled myself together, did my introduction again, threw away my script or whatever it was that I was using, and then just kind of spoke much more authentically and from the heart. And it was much more grounded, and it was fun. I remember it was joyful. And then the trainer did the same thing. Okay, now who is connected and feels, and the whole room went up. But I was very humbled by that experience. And it was a very good sort of lesson in learning to let go of a facade or a way of behaving that I thought I should be in order to be liked or approved of. And that comes up.
That's really interesting how these facades can trap us into a certain way of being. And I have a similar story, Ryan. I was at a business training event, and during this business training event, they had different experiences that they would put us through to test us physically. And the idea behind testing us physically was that they would be able to test us mentally and start to reveal and expose ourselves just the way that you did in front of this audience. And there was one part on the second day where I was surrounded by this group of men, and I was supposed to talk about the reason why I was here and what was landing for me and what wasn't. And as I began to talk, like you said, I felt like I was being myself. But the trainer there interrupted me and swore at me quite profusely. And many expletives. And he got up in my face and he said, Enoch, if you give us any more of this effing bullshit, then I'm kicking you out right now. And he looked around the group and he said, how many of you feel like Enoch is being authentic right now, that you're feeling him? And like you said, no one raised their hand. And I felt completely deflated because I didn't know what was missing. But see, I'd been so trained to put on this particular facade of how I was supposed to show up and what I was supposed to do, that it had actually made my words land hollow. So people couldn't feel me. They couldn't feel my passion. They couldn't feel my lack of passion. That just felt very, very robotic. So energy we can feel disease in our body. We can feel so polished that we lack energy. We lack connection with people.
Mm-hmm. And the kind of communication that we're talking about is deeper than the professional polished speaker. Like, it's about connecting with other people authentically and having them listen. And that kind of communication isn't always beautiful and polished and eloquent. In fact, it can be quite the opposite. It can be filled with stutters and mess and swear words and stuff like that.
Crying.
Crying, and it's different. This leadership communication is different. My wife, she was trained at RADA as an actor, and some of the stories that she tells me about their training is pretty brutal stuff. Like, they're really training to break you down and like dissolve the kind of outer shell through which you communicate, so that you can actually really step into being the characters that you're embodying, and that you're able to connect at a very deep level with the people that are watching you and the audience. And it's a very deep process of kind of getting comfortable in your own skin and who you are, and being courageous enough to bear it all on stage, if you like allowing yourself to be seen to be vulnerable. And in that space, then there's a kind of freedom for you to let out your self-expression, which is always compelling for people. It's always compelling.
So what we're getting at here is that, and I discovered this early on as I started this podcast, over 12 years ago now, as I began to try to decipher the code of success, especially as it related to architectural practice owners and architects, I began to see very clearly that oftentimes we would have people who would be doing the same external actions. So if you were to just look at them on a piece of paper, you're like, wow, they're really doing the same kind of things. And then some would have astronomically greater success while others would be struggling. And I just couldn't figure it out for a while. It just completely perplexed me. So it's like, where is the thread? Where is the thread? But what happened is during these interviews, they began to reveal themselves to me. I began to tell, I could see. And then as I met people in person, I began to notice some of the patterns, some of the energy. And they say that 80% of communication is nonverbal, or perhaps even more than that. And it was the energy that they were conveying. It was what they thought about themselves, how they carried themselves, the vision that they cast, how much they connected to it.
Yeah, that authentic energy and coming from a solid place, not trying to hide. People can sense when you're trying to hide, when you're trying to hide something. And often what people are trying to subconsciously hide is that they don't feel good about themselves, or they've been judging themselves about something, or I should be further along in life than I am right now, but I need to pretend that I am somewhere that I'm not, because I don't want to let anybody know about what I'm actually dealing with. And then it comes out in a very awkward, weird energy you get from somebody, and it just kind of, people don't feel good. They feel either repelled. And it's not always easy to kind of put your exact finger on it, but there's a lack of presence, and there's a lack of groundedness. And you can just, when we talk about sales, for example, I mean, there's a lot to be said for just having high self-esteem. Just having an ability to be able to generate your own self-esteem and ruthless belief in what it is that you're doing, and that and being in alignment with what you're doing is of integrity and is going to help people. But I would say a lot of professionals don't come from that place. And this is why we see people selling through email and long-winded proposals, and not wanting to be in front of people, and slipping into habits of, I'm just going to try and, bamboozle somebody with my beautiful portfolio and lots of photography and et cetera, et cetera. All those things have a place to play, don't get me wrong. Okay, they do have an important role to play as well. But when we're not comfortable in our own skin as a leader, the rest of the team starts picking up on that as well. They don't feel comfortable. They don't feel like they can be fully self-expressed. They don't trust you. And when they don't trust you, they switch off part of their brain. You're only going to get like 10% of what they can actually do or perform. And that's sad for them as well, because they end up just dealing with mediocrity. And then they'll get into complaint. And then they'll leave your office. And then you'll be frustrated about it. But it goes around and around and around.
And we can flip over. We can say the reverse is true. We can say that clients are magnetized towards you, team members. You bring out the best in team members. You attract better projects. All this happens because of the internal shift inside of ourselves. So then the question is, okay, first thing to recognize is that there's a spectrum of feeling comfortable about yourself, or a spectrum of self-esteem that we have. And I don't know that there's a top to that mountain. In other words, I don't know that there's a maximum amount of self-confidence, self-love, presence that a person can have. So that's good news for all of us, because it means that wherever we're at on the scale, this is a lever we can use to be more magnetic, to get better results, to lead people more powerfully, to influence more people, to have a bigger impact, to increase our incomes, to have more free time because we're utilizing our leadership skills instead of the hustle and grind culture that we were all raised in. So how does someone make this shift? Wherever we're at on the spectrum, Ryan, of self-esteem, feeling good in our own skin, whichever way we want to slice it, that natural born leaders seem to do so well at, what have you seen to be able to make a shift from someone who is where they're at to a higher level of self-leadership, a higher level of performance?
So we often use a book called The 3 Laws of Performance. And in that book is the idea of getting complete with your past. And this is a solid kind of psychological concept about there are certain things that are left open loop in our past, either relationships, things that we didn't deal with powerfully, something that happened to us, and then we made some meaning up about it, about me, and then we kind of silently play that story again and again and again in our mind of, well, I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough, I'm a fraudster, I'm a charlatan. I'm not. I mean, as well. We've interviewed some great, famous architects, and then behind the scenes of a podcast, they might confide in you or something about how they feel like an imposter. I've had that a few times with certain architects, and you're like, "Wow, really?" That was, I remember we had one. I won't say who it was, but I remember we were doing one of these live events, and they were on the panel with us. And the architect, before he went on stage, was like, I feel like such an imposter, I shouldn't be here. And I was thinking, it's like 200 people here to see you, what you've accomplished. But that insecurity was still there, and would have been a constraint to even further success and relationships, and what other things might not have been working as well. And while there might be some sort of, we look at somebody else's success and we don't actually know how they feel about it or themselves on the inside. Getting complete with the past is the most powerful way of piecing back together or beginning to learn how to generate self-esteem from yourself. Because often getting complete with the past means, it might mean confronting something that you've been hiding from. It might mean having a conversation with somebody who hurt you in the past and you've been harboring a resentment, and now it's time for you to let go of that resentment and own up how you've created a division in this relationship. It might mean owning something about you that you've been trying to reject for a long time, and then it's caused havoc in all these other sorts of relationships, or blame, etc., etc. And those conversations can be challenging, but on the other side of them is again, you get to experience yourself, you get to discover yourself. And being complete really is about a complete, total love and acceptance for you, just the way you are and the way that you're not. Creating that space of judgment-free awareness around you. And that's love. And in this, this completion becomes an enormous amount of forgiveness. Just being able to forgive yourself for the results that you've produced, forgive yourself for where you are in life at the moment, forgive yourself for the way that you behaved, forgive yourself for the way that the business is operating at right now. Because if we just keep on lying about it to ourselves or hiding where we're at or how we're feeling about it, then it kind of consumes us, and then we start to have this kind of repellent energy about us.
That's powerful, Ren. And I'm going to share an example from my own life, something that I'm currently dealing with right now. And this is why, one of the reasons why I love these podcasts, because it starts to open stuff up for us. In my earlier years, I was very, almost what you might call fundamentalist as it regarded laws, rules, regulations, things that I was taught, just wanting to impress, just this thirst and this desire to want to be, sitting in the front of the class, having all the answers, not getting out of line, not doing anything that would be seen as rebellious or dangerous or contrary to authority. And as I've gone through my, let's call it my midlife crisis of finding out that some of this rigidity was not working so well for me, I began to make a shift to see cultural norms, to see things like rules and expectations much more as guideposts or rules of a game that can be bent, sort of like in The Matrix, right? One of my favorite movies talks about how Neo starts to learn that the world is not so fixed as he thought it was. Now, part of this is as I look back at that former version of myself, and I look at the things that I did to people or things that I said to people that were oftentimes, yes, they followed the letter of the law, but in other instances, they would be very insensitive to how someone was feeling or how they were experiencing life. And so there's a part of me now that disdains that old part of me who was this kind of judgmental asshole character. So to bring it back to our listeners, so when I look at that, I can say, okay, there's an incompletion for me there because there's a part of me that hasn't forgiven myself for the way that I showed up previously, for being this semi-abrasive person who thought being right was more important than connecting with another human being. Whereas now, the thing that I'm most interested in is connecting with another human, and being right is, let's face it, after 20 years of marriage, I've discovered that being right is not as important as being connected to my wife. But that disdain and that dislike for that previous version of me now shows up in people who have that characteristic. So when I meet other people who display those kind of attitudes or that way of being, it can be very triggering for me because I haven't gotten to a place yet. I'm getting there now, but I'm slowly getting to a place where I can look at those people with more compassion and understanding. So would that be a good example of what we mean by completion and how something from the past ends up determining our current behavior?
Yeah, absolutely. And, the term being complete is a kind of way of fully accepting it as it is, and not necessarily not trying to get rid of it anymore, but it's just accepting that's how I have been. That was the result of it. I'm actually free of it. I don't have to behave in that way. That I have choices. And if there's things or emotional realizations around it, we can draw completion to it. It can be put back in the past.
Yeah, I love that. And then our energy or our way of being then gets freed up
Mm-hmm.
in positive ways. When I'm dealing with someone who's exhibiting those characteristics, let's say I'm dealing with someone who's very obstinate, perhaps they're insisting that they're right. If I'm getting triggered by that and thinking, oh, this person is a total prick, I can't stand this, then that's going to limit how I show up in that interaction with that person. It's almost like I'm constrained. The only options I have for interacting with that person are limited to a multiple choice question, A, B, C, or D. Whereas if I become complete with that, and then I'm not emotionally involved in trying to be right or judging this person or feeling my own internal storm around this, then it opens up freedom where I can be with the person and actually start a conversation of influence and just be present with what is, whether or not it influenced them or not.
Can you share that story you told me the other day about the guy on the plane who he shouted at you as you were putting your bag up? And then,
Yeah.
because this is that was a nice demonstration of not following a reaction, and then you kind of reframed it, and the interaction was very powerful.
It was beautiful. And to tee that up, I'll tell one story, Ryan, from my earlier youth that kind of represents the more austere and cold version of Enoch. And then I'll fast forward to this interaction that I had with this guy on the plane. So when I was 19 years old, I went on a Mormon mission. And Mormon mission, you go to a different country and you teach people about Jesus Christ and the Mormon doctrine and beliefs. So as an enthusiastic, wide-eyed 19-year-old missionary who's going to go out and save the world, I was all sort of full of religious fervor. And as part of the process of being trained to be a missionary, an evangelist, a salesman for religion, we would go to what's called the Missionary Training Center in Provo, Utah, and we'd get taught on the religious principles, etc. Now, we'd also get taught on leadership principles, and they would put us into organizational structures with other young men and women who were preparing to go on missions. And so for whatever reason, I was put into a leadership position. They called it a district leader, which means that I was the leader of a group of about 8 other missionaries, and I had a companion myself. So there would have been 10 total people in this little district. Now, we had very strict rules, as one would expect with a high demand religion, especially being a missionary and especially representing a church as a teenager. So one of the rules that we had was that we were only supposed to check our mail once per day.
Email or like postal mail?
The mail, well, email did exist. Email did exist, but we did not have access to it. This was physical letters. Physical letters. I mean, I know it's hard to believe, but we're talking like mail. So as the district leader of this small group of missionaries, I was the one that had to keep the mailbox, and I had a scheduled time that I would go down with the other missionaries. We checked the mail, and it was something we really anticipated because we were homesick, and half of us didn't really want to be there, and the food at times wasn't very good, and some of us had girlfriends, and so we just relished the opportunity to get a little bit of communication from them. No cell phones, no social media, and no email. So one day I discovered that my key was missing and I couldn't figure it out. And I discovered that there was another missionary in our group he was so homesick for his girlfriend. And we had butted heads a little bit about him wanting to go check the mail earlier in the day. But I was like, no, we're going to check it once per day. That's the rule. We're going to go in the afternoon. And then he ended up going and basically stealing the key, sneaking down there and getting his mail, right? No big deal. But in my little 19-year-old head, this was a massive, egregious error of protocol. And so I was torn up. I was torn up inside. What are we going to do with this rebellious missionary? Before you know it, he's going to be, transgressing all sorts of commandments. And after some careful consideration, unfortunately, a lot of praying on my knees, asking God how I should handle this extremely difficult situation, I came to the conclusion that I should just ignore it. Don't address it. I don't need to talk to him. Just let it go. Just let it go. Now, that wasn't my natural inclination, which is why I bring it up. And before I actually did come to that conclusion, I did give him a bit of a hard time. We did butt heads, And I did make him feel like crap for doing that, which is totally silly. And I feel totally guilty about that now. So this is an example of me being very insensitive to my colleagues' experience of being in this strange place, being asked to do something very big, leave your family for 2 years, being in a strange environment with new people, leaving his girlfriend, and me completely insensitive to what he was going through. So just a bit of emotional disconnection and lack of understanding. They're like really following the rules over someone else's well-being. So that gives a little bit of picture of how I approach rule following and like what the standards and regulations that people gave me, which made it difficult for me to connect with people and for them to feel loved by me because it always felt like I was approaching it transactionally. Now, fast forward to the story you were talking about, which is a much different situation. This was a couple weeks ago. I was flying to Oregon for a business trip to meet with some of our principals at Business of Architecture. We rented this nice Airbnb to get together and smoke some cigars and hang out in the lake. And on the plane ride there, we were all seated on the plane, and suddenly I heard a man in an elevated voice yelling very loudly and swearing at someone else who was a little bit farther back on the plane. And instantly, my nervous system got heightened because I'm like, is something going to go down here? I'd probably seen too many memes of these people getting into fist fights on planes. So I was already like in my mind, I was rehearsing my jujitsu moves that I learned and, thinking, how could I incapacitate this person if something went sideways? Yeah, exactly. And put them in a little, chokehold or maybe an arm bar. Fortunately, nothing happened. But as I was sitting there with this thought of like heightened awareness, I was like, wow, that was some really negative energy this guy was putting off. And it was at a family member. It's actually one of his kids that he was yelling at. And I just remember feeling so sad and so discouraged and just like, it's so sad that he feels so stressed out or whatever, that he needs to speak that way and put that kind of energy towards his kid. And even on top of that, I was thinking, if he does that in a public place, like on a plane, what must it be like to live in this guy's household? Right? Now, on top of that, he had a bit of a rough appearance. He looked like a man who lived outside and not necessarily was homeless, but he just had kind of a working class kind of look to him. So he didn't look particularly well kept. And so my judgments start to roll, right? This guy, who knows, he's probably abusive to his kids, whatever. I'm thinking not a good situation. And so that was kind of weighing on me pretty heavily. We went through the entire flight. Flight was peaceful. As we landed, he had 3 kids and there were 2 other adults with him. One was a teenager and the other one was an adult, maybe his wife or a grandparent. And as I was getting off the plane, I was just thinking about this and I just felt some compassion for him. So I went up to him, and as he's sitting there, because he's waiting for the other family members to get off the plane, I walked over to him and I said, "Excuse me." And he said, "Yes." And I said, "Hey, I just want to check in with you and see how you're doing. Because back there on the plane, I heard you raise your voice and I figured you were probably pretty stressed out. And I just want to check in and make sure you're all right." And literally, he completely melted. He was almost brought to tears. He talked about how they had just sold a piece of land in Alaska. They were moving their entire family to a new place in Oregon where he had no idea what was going to happen. Probably some financial hardship was involved. And he was going through the stressful situation of trying to corral his kids and keep them together on the plane, everything like that. And he looked at me and just with the most sincere, talking about authenticity, the most sincere, authentic response, he just said, yeah, after he told me a story about what was going on, he said, "Thank you. Thank you so much for caring." And I moved on. And needless to say, I felt amazing about that because I went outside my comfort zone to speak to a stranger. I addressed his behavior, but I did it with energy. Going back to the energetic thing, my energy was clean around it. I had gotten complete with my judgments, and my heart had been open to a situation and the possibility that I don't know anything about this guy at all. Let's approach it from a blank slate. So
The way that you approached him is you didn't make him wrong in any kind of way. Like, you didn't have any stuff going on about it. You didn't have any judgments. You dealt with your own judgments before you had the communication, and it just came from a heart, from the heart place. And you did it in spite of your own concern of how you might look and, how he might react further to you. It was uncomfortable on your part. So it was like a courageous act of caring and just very gracefully and elegantly put, and had somebody had a total stranger just feel safe.
Yeah. I really, I've heard that when, yeah, I've heard that when, people who talk about these near-death experiences in their life reviews, they often talk about how when they look back on their life, it's the little moments they didn't notice that they're so grateful for. The little kind words to a stranger, the smile, giving up your seat for someone else when they really needed it. And part of me hopes that that's going to be one thing that I'm going to be happy that I did is impacting another human being in a positive way. But you're right. The only reason I was able to do that is because in going back to this framework of getting complete, I'd gotten complete with my judgment. So I had enough of the plane ride to be complete with my judgments about him potentially doing something that was hurtful to another human being, and all the judgments I have about people who are abusive and people who yell and people who get angry, etc. And I wouldn't have been able to exercise that compassion if I hadn't been able to get complete, as you put it, Ryan, with my own judgments, allow them to be, and then make a choice past my programming of judging and criticism.
Beautiful. I think there's a really powerful lessons here in us taking on ourselves in our own leadership, developing self-awareness. And if we're not getting the results that we're wanting in our business and we feel like we're doing stuff, or like just start to look at how you're treating yourself. Like what's my emotional world like? Like really, what is it like? I do feel that there is, again, going back to this idea of energy, that you will attract the kind of energy that you're generating. And if you're operating at a low level of energy, where you're in complaint, you're tyrannical to yourself, you're judgmental on yourself, you're quite a harsh critic of yourself, that's a heavy energy. So don't be surprised when your team members are turning their brains off, or they're not really that motivated, or they don't want to stay until midnight, or you're finding it difficult to hire, or you're only closing 1 in 5 or 6 deals that come your way, or you don't have a pipeline, or you're too afraid to pick up the phone and do call somebody outside of your comfort zone. Let's check in with our energy. What's the complaint that I'm in? What's the resentment that I'm carrying around? All this stuff can be cleaned up, and when we start allowing ourselves to be at that higher frequency, then better stuff starts to come into your life. I was sharing today with some of our clients this idea about energy, and one thing that I got complete with, if you like, was drinking. And probably about, it was the end of 2013, and I wouldn't consider myself an alcoholic, but I'd also have a broader definition of what most people consider alcohol being an alcoholic. And I think on whatever, it's a spectrum, and it's an addictive substance. And we have a culture around it, which is certainly in the UK. I like the way in the US, the Americans view the Brits as kind of aristocracy and very gentlemanly, whereas the rest of Europe views Brits as drunken louts. And there's that kind of culture here, which is very much encouraged and reinforced. And I found myself in a situation where it wasn't working anymore for me. And I was having fun, don't get me wrong, and I've got lots of wonderful stories that, if you know me for long enough and well enough, I might share a few of them.
You probably heard some here on the podcast.
But
shall we tell the one about you getting arrested in where was it? Was it
no,
Taiwan? Hong Kong? Where were you at?
I'm not going to go into that story. That's it. You can ask me about it if you see me in person, and we'll see. You have to
come to a Business of Architecture live event.
Yeah, you have to earn the right to hear that story. It was a long time ago, But there was, the drinking, the hedonism stopped. It wasn't fulfilling. It wasn't bringing anything. And it was also bringing a kind of heavy energy. And with that energy, there was just like a level of chaos and a level of mediocre people that were in your life, and when I stopped drinking, immediately there was like a kind of rush of energy that started to fill my life and every single element of it. And guess what? Better quality people started to come into my life, and the people that I really cared about, like Yvonne. I'm sure if I'd carried on drinking, we wouldn't be married. It would have just deteriorated, and I would have been ignorant to why it had deteriorated as well. That was the other problem. But there was a lot more, stopping drinking meant that, oh great, there's not, I'm not having one day a week now where I'm waking up feeling awful and in some sort of form of self-loathing or self-pitying because you've just made yourself sick. Basically, you poisoned yourself, right? And that has a kind of resonance to it. And after a while, when that kind of disappeared, you're not doing that kind of behavior anymore. I was finding, wow, I've got trust in myself and kind of more self-esteem and more energy and more confidence. And, not soon after that, I left my job. I was working and then kind of had a sense of adventure and courageousness to go out and do my own business and do my own thing. And then that's when life got really exciting and really interesting. And and even now it's still something that I get a lot of energy from is having not being that person anymore.
And there's a principle at play here, which is, as a business leader, are you putting yourself in situations where you can get the reflection of things that might be in your blind spots? Are you putting yourself in peer groups? Do you have an advisory board? Do you have a men's group? Do you have a women's group? Do you have a coach? Do you have a mentor? Ryan, I believe you just hired a coach because we both invest heavily in ourselves.
So I've just hired a communication coach, actually. And I was very impressed with
Well, your communication's pretty good.
That's what I like to think. And I kind of have been watching this person on Instagram and followed some of their content. It's a guy called Shako Lockman. And I haven't started yet. We literally just kind of was enrolled by their team. But again, this idea of there's so much more with our communication to kind of be unpeeling and getting better at. And every time in my life I've invested in getting better at communication and getting more honest and doing this work of getting complete so that I can stand in more authenticity, great stuff happens. Great stuff just happens. It comes out of interpersonal relationships with the people that are most important to you. It happens with a new ability to be able to connect and expand your network, your level of being able to influence or have love or express what's inside of you kind of gets magnified. And yeah, that was kind of some of the motivations. And what we're doing here at Business of Architecture with having very intimate and deep relationships with our clients and wanting to be able to facilitate this sort of transformational completions that we've been talking about, it takes a lot of energy, like communication energy. And for us, this is our main tool, is communication. So there is no limit to us and our mastery of it. Like, I still feel, even after all these years of investing and spending and training in communication, I'm just a beginner. And it's, I'm going to be a student of it for the rest of my life.
It reminds me of the old Werner Erhard quote where he said, "You can have anything you want in the world if you can enroll enough people in your having gotten it."
Yes.
Did I butcher that quote, Ryan?
No, you're beautiful. Beautiful. It's a kind of, your results are very much a factor of your ability to be able to communicate the results that you want. Like, you speak your results into existence through other people. And this is very much what we're doing is in
Yeah.
teams, and what we're kind of how we started this conversation, where you start to sense and pick up other people's discomfort with themselves and their energy. And, as a coach, we're trained to look for it, right? And sense it, and then help people kind of deal with themselves and get complete with whatever is at the source of this discomfort. But for other people that you might be interacting with who might not be conscious of what it is, they'll just get a kind of like, just a be turned off. Don't trust that person, not sure. And they'll describe it in something which isn't quite correct, but it's pointing at something deeper. And it can mean the difference between, getting the kind of projects that you want or not, or getting the fees that you want or not, or attracting the team members that you want, retaining the team members that you want to have. So much of the kind of business success is wrapped up in our self-esteem and how that then plays out in our communication.
And this is why not everyone is a fit to work with the business of architecture team. Because the work that we do with clients is very confronting. That we don't just look at the business tactics, we go into the root causes. And not everyone's up for that, nor does everyone want that.
If you want to go and learn accountancy or some spreadsheets, there's, plenty of places to do that. My assertion is that architects are typically very intelligent and can figure stuff out. But if this game of business was purely based on intellectual capacity, then architects should be very rich on the whole, and that's not the case.
Be winning it.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
we all
That's
know
great.
that we've met very wealthy people who are as thick as two planks, but they're intelligent in a different way. They're socially and emotionally intelligent, and they're resilient, and they're persistent, and they don't take no for an answer, and they know how to navigate themselves. They know how to make powerful requests. They know how to enroll other people. They know how to put smart people in the places where smart people need to be so they get the right answers. They know how to be like ruthlessly focused. They know how to harness the power of commitment and do things even when they don't want to do them to get the results. That's the difference. It's not an intellectual one. They know how to do the work on their own communication and be, kind of open and honest, and get complete with that and be a powerful and dynamic communicator. They know the power of presence and storytelling.
And the good news is, all of those things that Ryan just mentioned are learnable skills. So wherever we're at on this process, we can grow, we can learn, we can become better. So that, I think that's fantastic news.
It's I don't know if this is a true a story or whether it's a kind of one of these business myths. But I like the story about Warren Buffett and how he talks about one of the best investments he ever made was the Dale Carnegie course that he invested in on how to communicate. And this is the greatest living investor that we've ever known. And he talks about a Dale Carnegie course as being one of the best investments he ever made. Are you fact checking this?
I am fact checking it. I'm going to fact check it here.
Fact check it. I don't know if it's one of these kind of business myths that you hear from coaching circles.
Yeah. It starts to true or not. Let's find out, Ryan. We're going to find out here. But anyways, it's true. Warren Buffett has often said that the best investment he ever made was taking a Dale Carnegie's public speaking course. Buffett also emphasizes that investing in yourself, learning skills, improving habits, strength and weakness is your highest return investment, according to time.com and 15 other sources.
Yeah, because this is really interesting, right? And we were talking about me hiring a coach, and I was looking at investments, right? And I've been very prudent with my savings over the last couple of years and had some money to put into something, and was thinking about, okay, well, what would be good investments? Should it be crypto? Should it be gold? Should it be property? Should it be doing this, that, and that? And then it was kind of like, well, actually, me always seems to pay off. Always seems to pay off.
Love that.
It always seems to pay off.
By far the best investment I've made is always in myself.
Mm-hmm.
Always in myself. So the question we have for you as a listener today is, where are you investing in yourself? And where are you telling yourself that you're good enough in some particular area of expertise? Do you have a mirror right now in your life, a mentor, a coach, someone that can reflect back to you where you're at so you can focus on it, become aware of it, start to activate a change there, and ultimately become awake in that area, move into unconscious competence.
All right, and that's a wrap. Now here's today's Smart Practice Tooltip. You're probably great at designing buildings, but how about designing your firm's ownership transition? That's where even the best can get murky. If you spent years building your firm, you may be wondering at this point, what's next? Well, we've created a guide that breaks down the messy truths of ownership handovers and gives you the blueprint of what to avoid. Because here's the thing, legal documents won't save you from leadership meltdowns, unfortunately. This guide is for you if you're an owner looking to transition out of your firm, or perhaps you're an employee moving into firm ownership. You can get this free guide for podcast listeners by going to businessofarchitecture.com/transition-ready. And now, a word from today's sponsors.
Today's episode is sponsored by Vectorworks. Why settle for switching between multiple design programs to complete a single project? With Vectorworks Architect, you don't have to. Simplify your workflow with a hybrid 2D and 3D modeling environment made to support your work, from the pre-design phase all the way through construction documentation in a single platform. Learn more about the tool that can help you accomplish everything you need with the free 7-day trial of Vectorworks Architect. Get started here at vectorworks.net/business of architecture. A while ago, we began to hear reports of a company that was helping some of our clients build remote teams. We looked into it more closely and discovered the company World Teams that was helping small architectural practitioners build remote teams that were both capable and qualified. We were intrigued by another business that are addressing one of the critical pain points for small architectural practices, which is the ability to grow and shrink a team effectively, to be able to handle higher workflow without having to staff up significantly, and also being very sensitive about labor cost. World Teams is built to address these issues. World Teams is a small but mighty company that helps architectural practices build high-performing remote teams quickly and efficiently, saving you the headache of sorting resumes and interviewing underqualified candidates. World Teams operates in your time zone and prioritizes near-native English speakers, ensuring clear and efficient communication with your remote team members. They have flexible contracts so you can adjust your team size as your needs evolve. Additionally, you're connected directly with your skilled professionals, which fosters trust and collaboration, and World Teams helps you reduce your operating cost without compromising the quality that's so important to a practice. To download a free guide for building a remote team for a small architectural practice, go to businessofarchitecture.com/World Teams. That's one word, businessofarchitecture.com/World Teams. As a reminder, sponsorship is not an endorsement, and you must do your own due diligence before entering into any business relationship. Go to businessofarchitecture.com/World Teams.
And thank you to those recent listeners who left reviews for this podcast on iTunes. We so appreciate it because as other design professionals find this information, it helps the tide for all of us be raised. We'd love to acknowledge you here on the show. If you leave a review, you can do that by going to your iPhone, search for Business of Architecture, and after clicking on the show, scroll all the way to the bottom to leave a review. Today's episode is sponsored by Smart Practice, the world's leading step-by-step solution for small architectural practice owners that want to structure their existing practice so the complexity of business doesn't get in the way of the architecture. So if you're ready to graduate from all the admin, tedious work that has you bogged down, now may be the time to invest in getting your practice into a smart way of operating. Go to smartpracticemethod.com and you'll be able to access a free video going over the Smart Practice Method, how it works, and other firm owners like yourself that have implemented this revolutionizing way of running their practice. And as a reminder, whenever we have guests on the show, I just want to remind you that their views are not those of the hosts. We make no representation, promise, pledge, warranty, contract, bond, or commitment, except to help you live an incredible life. Carpe diem.